On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we preview the point guard combo guard position for KU basketball. What's it going to look like? What are the projected roles? Is it a better, worse, or the same unit from where it was a season ago? Plus a little early KU Houston thoughts.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and this is Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, is thank you to the everydayers tuning in to each and every episode. We're going to be talking KU basketball, that point combo guard preview for KU, get into all the players they have. What are the possible roles look like? What does the overall position look like for KU? And we'll also get into a little early thoughts for the KU Houston game coming up on Saturday, which may be to the surprise of many. They opened up as about a touchdown favorite coming into this game. First, our episode today is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. So who are the players as part of this? We split this up. We're going to have an episode later this week doing the wings. We're going to have a later episode, which is kind of the big man, power forward center types. So this is the kind of point combo guard preview. So the players we have in here, Dajuan Harris, 140 career games played, 111 career games started, 895 points, obviously going to be on pace to score 1,000 for his career, 676 assists, which is fourth most in school history. It's going to take a lot this year if he wants to pass Aaron Miles for first, but another similar season to what he's done the past couple of years will get him to second ahead of Jock Vaughn. Obviously, more years for Dajuan to do it, but still impressive nonetheless. The biggest strengths, veteran experience. He's a pass-first player on a team this year. You look at the team last year, and especially because of the Kevin McCullough injury and the lack of, scoring options at all times, or the lack of depth on last year's team, it's a little harder to be a pass-first point guard on a team like that. On this year's team that has all these guys who can be a bucket, Hunter Dickinson, right? KJ is coming back off a season. He averaged 12.5 points per game. AJ Storr, right? Zeke Mayo, Rylan Griffin, all these guys who can get you a bucket. It is beneficial to have a guy like Dajuan Harris who can be a pass first, because there's only one basketball, right? And so he can set them up in better ways. And ideally, the other strength here, what you're getting is elite defense from Dajuan Harris. Now, let's get into the biggest questions. What type of defensive version are you getting? Because the version 2 years ago from Dajuan Harris was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. He was one of the best defensive players in the country. The defensive version last year for Dajuan was, still some flashes of being good, but overall inconsistent. And I think overall still a positive on the defensive end, but, I wouldn't call his season last year a top 10 defensive season in the Big 12 a season ago. And it's not necessarily his fault. It was that the role he was asked to do, the minutes he was asked to play, everything made it harder to exert energy on that end. This year, going back to the idea you have more players who can take over the offense, I think you should be able to get back to a little bit more of that, because the best version of Dajuan and the best version of Dajuan helping this team is exactly that. But what version are you going to kind of get there? And then can you continue to get kind of that 38 to 40% from three-point range from Dajuan Harris? Can the volume go up maybe a little bit more? He's been at 2.1 three-point attempts per game the last 2 years. Obviously, it behooves this team to have more three-point shooting around Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams. And so, for Dajuan Harris, can you continue to shoot in the high 30s, low 40s from three, and maybe get that up to even a little bit more, maybe 3.5 per game in what you're producing there? The next guy is Shakeel Moore. He's the transfer from Mississippi State. 124 career games played, 68 career starts. That's not just Mississippi State, also NC State, where he started his career. Over 1,000 career points, 1,040 points, 170 steals. And I don't think the guys who transfer over, I don't think their numbers put up count to the KU leaderboards all time. I think it's just what you did at KU. But hypothetically, if it did, he'd be on pace to crack the top 10 list in steals all time for KU. Devontae Graham's at 197. He's in 8th place. Kirk Heinrich's in 7th at 206. So there's a chance he could, work to that in terms of his all-time steals, even though it won't actually go up on those leaderboards. As far as the biggest strength, that kind of tells you a little bit about it. Ability to earn steals, his defense overall, pressuring of the basketball, his athleticism and bounce. He had, I think, 8 career dunks so far. 8 dunks last year, 28 career dunks. a guy who can really get up for a guy who's a little bit shorter. He gives you that athleticism and bounce that you're looking for. As far as the biggest questions, how does his injury, having that, I forget if it was broken foot or whatever, how does that affect things for his start of the season and how he's going to play this year? And which three-point shooter are you going to get for Shakeel Moore, right? If you're getting the guy who shot 34% as a freshman or 36% as a senior, he can play a little bit longer, right? Because if you're playing next to Dajuan Harris, you have to be able to hit threes versus if you're shooting 31% from three, like you did as a sophomore, or 26% from threes you did as a junior, it's a little tougher to play you, and you become more of just a player who's going to play 8 minutes a game when Dajuan Harris goes to the bench, right? So that's going to kind of impact things a little bit there. Next guy up is David Coit. He's the transfer from Northern Illinois. Before that, he was at a junior college, and no matter where he was, he could score the basketball. 58 games played in 2 years at NIU in the MAC. 1,051 points in just 2 seasons. Pretty incredible there. 175 made threes on over 35% from three, which wound up being 8.5 3-point attempt per game. So this guy, biggest strength, his scoring ability, his ability to shoot off the bounce, his ability to score in a multitude of ways, his shooting from deep range, his shooting from three, his shooting at high volume. Obviously at Kansas, I expect that percentage to go up. The volume will go down, but he's going to get more open looks at Kansas. And because the volume is going down and you're getting to pick and choose your shots a little bit more, it should allow the percentage to go up a little bit too. Kind of like Jalen Coleman-Lands. I think the year before he was shooting in that mid-30s range at Kansas. He was just an absolute sniper. As far as the biggest questions, though, can he play next to Dajuan Harris? He's 5'11". How does that work there? On the defensive side of the ball, he actually rated okay on synergy, but I don't know what to expect there. It comes from a team that wasn't very good defensively or just overall at Northern Illinois. So what does that mean? Does the efficiency, does the playing against a higher level, how does that translate over? How does what he likes to do transfer to what Bill Self likes to do in terms of being kind of a shot chucker from the outside? Those are kind of the questions with that one. And then you have Zeke Mayo. Zeke Mayo is the combo guard transfer from South Dakota State. Local kid, went to Lawrence High School, was one of the most dominant, short stints of high school basketball I have ever seen. It was in the state tournament game his last year. They were playing against a Blue Valley North team that I think would have had a real shot to win the state title. It ended up getting, I think, canceled because of COVID the rest of the way. I think that's the right year. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe they did end up going far. I don't know. Maybe that's a year off. Regardless, doesn't matter. Zeke Mayo in the fourth quarter of that game went on a run where it was something ridiculous. He scored 20 straight points or something for the team. He ended up with 40 for the game, which is incredible for high school basketball where we have 32-minute games. But anyway, 102 career games played for Zeke at South Dakota State, 87 starts, including on 2 tournament teams. He scored 1,576 points, 501 rebounds. There's a chance that Zeke Mayo, depending on how much he can score, how much he plays, all that stuff this year, Hunter Dickinson's already done it. The KU has 2 career 2,000-plus point scorers on the team this year with Zeke Mayo and Hunter Dickinson. And again, those don't count to the KU leaderboards because of them doing it at other schools. But it's wild considering that KU has 3 of those all time. Again, I'm not saying they count to the leaderboard, but Kansas has 3 all time, right? With Rafe LaFrentz, Nick Collison, and Danny Manning. And so with Mayo and Dickinson, think about, I don't know, just the odds of having, especially in today's day and age of college basketball, where players transfer away, where players, go pro early and everything, the chances of having 2 career 2,000-point scorers on the same roster would actually be pretty incredible. The biggest strengths for Zeke: scoring, shooting efficiency. He's a career 39% three-point shooter on high volume. He's an elite free throw shooter. He has the ability to get his own shot and shoot from deep and create gravity and spacing for your offense. The biggest questions, this one, I don't know. He was a good rebounder at South Dakota State, so it's not really a question about that. It's that, will the rebounding translate in the same way it did to Kansas? Because Kansas is looking for ways to improve as a rebounding team. As much as they're looking to get better defensively and three-point shooting, rebounding was a key story in last year too. And how will his rebounding numbers that have been really good, how will they translate to better competition along with the athleticism stuff? And then the bigger one here is, what will the defense be? He was rated by Synergy as kind of an average defender the last couple of years at South Dakota State, but that's a much, less explosive athlete in the Summit League than you're going to be going up against in the Big 12 or the schedule that Kansas is playing against. And so If Zeke can end up just being an average defender this year, that's a win for Bill Self. That's a win for Kansas and what he's going to provide for you on the offensive end of the court. But what are you going to get on that end? Or is it going to be something where teams just continually target him and it becomes a bit of an issue? I don't know. That will be certainly interesting to see. The last guy here I'll just briefly mention, Elmarko Jackson. Obviously, he's going to be out for this year. The big question for him is just how he's going to return following the season. And is he going to set up in 2025-26 as being a starter, as the next point guard after Dajuan Harris and Zeke Mayo depart? Or is he going to be viewed as a bench guy? Like, how is that all going to work out? But that's something for future stories because he will be out for this season. All right, let's get into how we think this is going to divvy out in terms of the projected roles. The position group, is it better, worse, or the same overall than last year? We answer that question, plus more KU Houston talk for a little football coming up next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for small businesses, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. They help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to a perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. All right, thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, and thank you for making it your first listen every day. You can check out one of our other shows to make your second listen, Locked On College Basketball, Locked On College Football, whatever is your taste. If you have a specific NBA, NHL, MLB team, you can find those with our Locked On network. All right, what are the projected roles for these players for KU? Let's start with this one, the starters. Dajuan Harris, obvious starter, pencil him in, gets over 30 minutes per game. The bigger question here is how many minutes, right? Because Bill Self has been vocal about this a couple times now, once like in the middle of last year, or once during this offseason so far, about him being closer to a maybe 28 to 32 minute per game guy. Now, when it's all said and done, he has so much trust in Dajuan Harris that it still wouldn't surprise me if it ends up being 34, 35 minutes. But does that end up being the case? Does he get 30, 32 minutes per game? We'll see. With Zeke Mayo, I can't decide. I could see it being in the mid-20s. I could see it being in the low 30s, right? I mean, if Zeke Mayo ends up being your most dynamic offensive perimeter player, being your most dynamic offensive guard, but he's struggling defensively, maybe it leans toward being 25 minutes per game. But what if he's providing you that offense and the defense is, like I said, just average? Then maybe he can get 30, 32 minutes per game. Part of that, too, is how the competition is doing. Does Ryland Griffin, does David Coit, does Shakeel Moore, do some of these other guys that are going to earn enough minutes that it eats into what Zeke Mayo is doing? So that kind of becomes the question there. As far as a roll off the bench, I think if he's healthy, and obviously he's expected to be healthy for the start of the season, but what I mean by this with Shakeel Moore is that if he's healthy and that the coming back from the injury allows him to practice well, to be the same player, to show that same athleticism, to not have to catch up on all the things he missed in the practices that he missed. If he is healthy and back to the guy he was, I think Shakeel Moore will have a role off the bench. And again, what is that role? It could be just the backup point guard if the offense isn't working, that you can't really play him next to Dajuan. And, you know, if Dajuan's playing 32 a night, maybe that's 8 minutes a night. Or it could be you're going to be the backup point guard. And if you're hitting some shots, you're going to be playing, 5-10 minutes next to Dajuan or next to Zeke Mayo or something like that, to where you are having, 15-ish minutes per game. I think I made the comparison earlier in the offseason to Roderick Stewart, that you have a lot of these other guards. Now, that was before Elmarko Jackson got hurt, and who knows how that would have kind of divvied out. But I think it ended up being that before the injury happened, Shakeel Moore was maybe in line to play even more than a guy like Roderick Stewart was. Then I have spot minutes for David Coit. Now, this could be one where it ends up being a roll off the bench, especially if Shakeel Moore's injury ends up causing him to be behind the eight ball, so to speak. But I think right now, David Coit would be that kind of Jalen Coleman-Lands role where it's like some games he's hitting shots, he's on, he's going to play 15, 20 minutes that night. Other nights, he might get a DNP. Other nights, he might play 7 minutes. He might play 6 minutes, right? Just kind of depends, and it's spot minutes here or there, depending on that matchup. If he hits his first couple shots, if he's hot, all those sorts of stuff. Is there an injury? Is somebody in foul trouble? Whatever. Then you have Elmarko Jackson, who is the future piece as part of this. I thought about making Jamari McDowell. Did I count him as a combo guard? Do I count him as a wing? He'll be in the wings preview. He would classify here for what it's worth as well. And then overall, kind of bottom line here for the position group, is the position here, the point guard, combo guard position for KU this upcoming season, is it better, worse, or the same to where it was last season? Now, it's going to be easy as we compare these it's always easy when we do this before the season to view it in the lens of, well, this roster has all this potential in the world and all these guys are at their peak. And last year, especially compared to last year, where it was a disappointing season by KU standards, to where, of course, it's going to be easy to say it is better. So let's try to think about this realistically. So Dajuan Harris, there's a chance Dajuan is the same guy he was a season ago. There's also a chance Dajuan is the same guy he was 2 seasons ago, which I think the Dajuan 2 seasons ago was better than the Dajuan last year. There's also a chance that it's that senior year final Bill Self ride bump, and it's the best version of Dajuan Harris we've ever seen. But I have a hard time believing that it's going to be a worse version of Dajuan than it was a season ago. So at the very least, it's the same, hopefully a better version. Zeke Mayo. Now, on paper, you could say, well, we were excited about Nick Timberlake, what he would provide shooting the basketball and everything like that. I think if you're just comparing the transfer profile, Zeke Mayo has always had more to his game than Nick Timberlake did. Right? Zeke Mayo has been able to hit shots off the bounce consistently. He's shown an ability to hit free throws at a high rate and have a little bit of a floater game and pass and be a good rebounder. And he was on winning teams. He was on 2 tournament teams. Nick Timberlake, his teams were, could they finish 500 or whatever it was? It was a little bit of a different thing that I think it's night and day where Zeke Mayo came from. Plus, Zeke Mayo was the conference player of the year. It's just very different in where you're talking about. Then when you look at the kind of early indications and reports that you've heard from the coaching staff, how they're translating over, it sounds like it's, again, night and day with Zeke Mayo. So I think that's going to be a huge improvement. If we just compared to the numbers, you would take the overs on all of them, but you do remain in the back of your mind that, yeah, you were excited about this guy and it didn't work out. So of course it could happen to somebody else, but on paper, I think that's a much better version by a healthy margin. Then Shakeel Moore, I think, again, if he's healthy, that kind of, obvious caveat that you put on all of this. If you're comparing Shakeel Moore this year as a 5th-year player, or gosh, he's going to be a 6th year, whatever, graduate senior player compared to what you got as a true freshman from Elmarko Jackson. Now, ideally, the ceiling of Elmarko Jackson is higher, but if you're just talking about last year's Elmarko versus this year's Shakeel Moore, you take the more experienced Shakeel Moore, who's proven it more, who's been a better shooter, and has shown that he can be a really good defender. So that would be an upgrade there. And then if you're talking about, I guess, again, if you wanted to add Jamari McDowell, you could and compare that to David Coit. I think you'd get more from Coit. But regardless, you'd just say, hey, well, this year you have David Coit and last year you didn't. So that just means this year you also have more depth. You also have another capable player that you did not have the luxury of having last year. So I think as you go through that, it's very simple. Yes, this group is better on paper than it was a season ago. And that's even if we're just viewing it from the lens of if you were coming into last offseason expecting Nick Timberlake to be good and Elmarko Jackson to be this 5-star really good recruit, maybe that was the one that would turn it and say, oh, I think Elmarko is going to live up to the 5-star billing right away. That would be the one that would be a little bit different there. But I think on paper, it's definitely clear that the point guard, combo guard position group for this year for KU is better than it was a season ago. All right, let's get to some early KU football. Houston thoughts ahead of the game on Saturday. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. You don't want to miss that Allen Fieldhouse energy this year, and you can go to games with Game Time. Or maybe you're looking for a ticket this upcoming Saturday for the KU Houston game. I will tell you, you will not have a hard time finding it. And honestly, it's actually a great opportunity. Maybe you've always wanted to go to Arrowhead Stadium, or maybe your kid has always wanted to go to Arrowhead Stadium. Well, guess what? You can get some great tickets for the KU Houston game. Just view it as going to have a good time. I mean, I'm literally looking right now. This is section 136, which is basically at the 35, 40 yard line, row 8 for $75 with all-in pricing on Game Time, which that's a cool feature, by the way. You can click the all-in pricing. You don't have to be surprised by the late ticket fees. You see it right there with Game Time. Take care of the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks and download the Game Time app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. All right, finishing up on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Like I said, we will have a KU Wings preview later this week. We will have not chicken wings. We'd love to do a top 10 chicken wings in Lawrence, but no. KU basketball wings. We will do KU big men as well. We'll have a late night in the fog preview later this week. We'll have a KU Houston preview later this week. But here's some early thoughts on the KU Houston game. So I'm looking at College Football Insiders, and it actually has this game as basically a pick 'em. It actually gives Houston a 51% probability, so slight lean in the coin flip to Houston winning this game with a disgusting projected score of 22.63 to 22.29. Now, Vegas did not feel this way. They continue to back KU as being better than the record indicates because of how some of these losses have gone. KU opened as like a 7.5, 8.5 point favorite, depending where you're looking. I looked on FanDuel earlier before recording this. It was already down to 6.5. So people betting on Houston, which I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up getting closer to like 3.5, 4.5. I don't know. Maybe it reverts at some point in time. But you look at it, Houston's had a pretty good defense so far this season. But the offense for Houston has been really bad. That was until last week. They had a new quarterback in there, and they put up 30 points on TCU. And that is what is very jarring, is that among all these games that KU has lost, the one that I have the worst argument for that KU should have won is TCU. Not saying they couldn't have won, like they could have won that game. But it took you being, +2, +3 in the turnover margin, and you still lost by 11. Like that was the one where I think you got beat the best, I guess, if that kind of makes sense. Like it's the least coin flippy, the least random of the losses that you've had, the least blown fourth quarter lead, I guess, that you've had of the games. Not that this is encouraging to talk about, but like point being, that was your basically worst performance, and Houston just beat them on their home turf by a sizable margin after making the QB change. Also, Willie Fritz wanted the KU job when it was open. They went with Lance Leipold. I don't even know that Willie Fritz was one of the two finalists. It seemed like it was Leipold versus Jeff Monken. I do think Fritz was probably in the running on that next tier, along with like Mike Elko. So, I mean, there were a lot of good candidates that were in it and stuff. I think Dan Lanning, who's now at Oregon, was part of this as well. So, point being, good job by Travis Goff to find a lot of good candidates. But, this is going to be one where, and you can't even point to like, okay, KU's off the bye week. Houston's off the bye week too, so this is going to be a tough one for KU. Houston's a gritty, tough team. And whenever you look at a Willie Fritz team, they are well coached. They're disciplined. So KU better be on their P's and Q's. Otherwise, things could be interesting in Arrowhead. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back for more KU basketball positional previews later this week on LOJ.